Okay, so today we're tackling something absolutely massive. How does a country even begin to lay the groundwork for a national nuclear power program? And we're not just talking about building one power plant here. No, this is about crafting a blueprint that will literally shape a nation's energy, its environment, and its economy for a century or even more.
I mean, think about it. It's a colossal undertaking. You've got immense costs, incredibly complex technology, and these really long-term commitments to safety. You definitely can't just wake up one morning and decide to build a reactor. You need a detailed plan, a grand strategy that happens long before the first shovel ever even thinks about hitting the ground.
And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? The choices made at the very beginning of this journey are going to have ripple effects for decades, maybe even centuries to come. So getting that initial planning right, it's not just important, it's pretty much everything.
So, to get our heads around this, here's our game plan. We'll start with the big picture of the planning process. Then we're going to dive into a really important tool called a strategic assessment, or C. We'll break down how it's different from a project-level review, walk through the steps, see what it actually covers, and then at the end, really understand why this whole thing is so critical.
Right, so where does a country even begin? Well, it turns out there's an internationally recognized playbook for this. It's a very deliberate, step-by-step approach that's designed to make sure all the big, tough questions get answered in exactly the right order.
And this framework comes from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. It breaks the entire journey down into 3 phases. Now, what's really fascinating here is where that strategic planning happens. Look at that, it's right there in Phase 1, which is just called considerations. This is happening before a country has even officially decided to go for it. The big picture environmental thinking starts right at the very beginning.
And that big picture environmental thinking, it actually has a specific name, a Strategic Environmental Assessment, or SEA. This is the core concept we're really going to unpack today.
So, what is an SEA? Well, you can think of it as a high-level review that happens super early in the game. The key word here is proactive. This is not about checking a box after all the important decisions have been made. Nope, it's a tool that's used during the planning process to actively shape the strategy and help leaders steer clear of environmental pitfalls from the absolute get-go.
Now, you've probably heard of something called an EIA, an Environmental Impact Assessment. And it is absolutely crucial to understand that an SEA is something completely different. This distinction is really the key to this whole thing. An EIA is what happens down at the project level. It's focused, it's super detailed, and it's site-specific. It asks the question, what are the environmental impacts of building this specific power plant on this specific piece of land? And it happens much later in the process.
Okay, let's put them side by side. The SEA is strategic, it's national, and it happens early. It looks at broad options like, hey, which regions of our country are even suitable, or what kind of technologies should we even be considering? The EIA, on the other hand, is operational, it's localized, it happens later, and it's examining a specific design at a specific location. Here's a good way to think about it. The SEA is deciding which city to live in, while the EIA is getting the building permit for your specific house.
And this pyramid here illustrates that relationship perfectly. See, the CA operates way up at the top tiers of decision-making. It's helping answer the big why questions in national energy policy, and the what, how, and where questions for the nuclear program itself. And only then do those high-level decisions create the framework that guides all the specific project-level EIAs down at the bottom.
Okay, so we know what an SEA is and why it's so different from an EIA. But how does a country actually do one? What are the actual steps involved?
Whoa, okay, this flowchart shows the full official process, and yeah, it looks pretty complex because it is. It's super comprehensive. It covers everything from the initial question of, do we even need an SEA, all the way to monitoring the results years down the line. But don't worry, we can break it down into a few logical steps.
So first is screening. For a nuclear program, the answer is pretty much always going to be yes. Next comes scoping, which is just deciding what key issues to cover. Then you have the assessment itself, where all the options are evaluated. After that, a report is created to inform the final decision. And then, and this is so important, monitoring, which tracks real-world impacts. And running alongside all of this is continuous engagement with the public, which is absolutely essential for transparency.
So what exactly gets put under the microscope during that whole assessment phase? Well, the scope is incredibly broad. It covers both the technical nitty-gritty of the nuclear program and its much wider environmental and social context. On the technical side, the SEA is looking at everything, and I mean
everything, not just the power plant. It looks at the entire fuel cycle, from mining all the way to enrichment. It looks at the long-term strategy for spent fuel and waste, security and emergency response, and all the massive infrastructure that's needed to support the program, like new roads or giant transmission lines. And it assesses all of those technical areas through this really wide environmental and social lens. So it's looking at the impact on public health, on air and water quality, on local ecosystems and wildlife. It considers land use, climate change, and even if the area is susceptible to natural hazards like earthquakes. It is a true 360-degree review.
All right, we've been deep in the weeds here, talking about process and procedure. But it's definitely worth zooming out for a second to ask, why go through all this trouble? Why does this highly structured, early-stage planning really, truly matter?
This quote from the IAEA really just sums it all up perfectly. A good SIA leads to more sustainable development, for sure. It strengthens the policy itself, but maybe most importantly, it helps avoid catastrophic mistakes. I mean, can you imagine selecting a reactor technology that's totally incompatible with your country's grid? Or picking a site that's near an undiscovered fault line? These are the billion-dollar, decade-long errors an SEA is designed to prevent, all while building the public trust you need for a project this massive to succeed.
So, when you think about it, this rigorous process isn't just a rulebook for nuclear power. It's really a model for thinking strategically about any large-scale decision with huge, long-term consequences. And that leaves us with a final question. Whether it's managing our water resources, planning new transportation networks, or preparing for climate change, where else do we desperately need to apply this kind of forward-looking blueprint? Thanks for tuning in.